on the wiki site, so it's all there. But the first thing that I think you have to think about, I've looked at probably 50 different creativity models, but I like this one the best because I thought it fit the best with education. And the first thing you start with when you start thinking creatively is mess finding. What's the mess? How are you going to fix it? How are you going to make it work? And all of us in our class every day are dealing with some kind of mess. It could be all kinds of things. It can be instructional, it can be social, it can be parents, it can be the community. But we have to figure out how to solve it. And the first thing we have to do is find some data. Now, once we find data, our mess may change. So these things, again, don't go in a straight line. And this is why I'm going down, because they really go back and forth. The next thing you're going to do is, what is the specific problem? Sometimes you know you've got a mess, but you don't really know what the specific problem is and how to deal with it. Because once you determine the problem, then you start getting some ideas about how to do something about it. And then the next thing that comes in creative thinking is idea finding. This is where you really start thinking about ideas. They may not all be good ideas. When you brainstorm with your kids in class, don't they always come up with some things that you're thinking, what on earth were you thinking? They always do. Solution finding, and then finally, what do we have to make it a valid piece of creative thought? Acceptance. Now, it may be their acceptance or group acceptance. But all of these things go back and forth, and you're going to keep going around and around too. Now, let's talk for a minute. We're going to brainstorm on these two. Creative question. I think this is something that we haven't talked a lot about in the workshop. Did you need the is that the sign-in sheet for that?
This is the revised schedule.
Okay, thank you. Okay, revised schedule. We're going to go into 1:30, 1:30 to 2:30 lunch, 2:30 to 2:45, the BSS ELD program with Miriam Hassan, 2:47 to 3:07, please note that. The evaluation program with Simon Testa, 3:10 to 3:40, we're back on schedule. Becoming an inspirational teacher, 3:40 to 4:20 panel and audience discussion, 4:25 to 4:45 the way forward, and then 4:45 to 5 the closing notes. So Mr. Casordi is going to be speaking very briefly. 5 to 5:30, what we all love the best here, tea. I've learned to have a whole new appreciation for tea, y'all. It's been lots of fun. All right, so let's take a few minutes, and I want you to work again as groups. All right, when you are using creative questioning in your classroom, how can you make it better? What we haven't yet, and how many different ways can. So I want you to come up with some examples of each that you could use in your classroom on your daily practice. And I'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes to work on that together as a group. You ask for information to come back to you in a linear fashion. A plus B equals C, or A plus B might equal what? All right, this is something we have to think about as teachers. I know I've been guilty of it. Give me back the facts. And sometimes we have to have those facts.
Exactly.
There's no getting around it. You've got to have the facts. But sometimes we need to go a little beyond the facts and think about what we're doing with the facts. Because if you've got the facts and you don't know what to do with them, what's the point of having the facts? All right, so let's talk for a minute. Let's start over on this side this time. Give me some examples of questions that you could ask in your classroom using these kind of thinking strategies.
Okay. What we were discussing about? We were discussing about pre-thinking skills and pre-planning within the classroom, and that leads to these questions. So we were doing a project, and I just gave them an example that the kindergartners came up to me and they were exploring 4 seasons. And they came up to me that we want to, the driving question is how we can make rain. We want you to build a fountain. That means they wanted me to build a product. I said, I'm not going to do that till I find out how you reach that question. And I brought the children into my atelier and I asked them that, okay, how do you think you can make rain? Are you a nature guy, or are you the weather station guy, or how you're going to find out? So what have you researched on that? How you've done that? How can you make rain? So they, created a situation in the school that they just were falling water from the roof. I said, that's not the solution. And if you want something permanent in your class and you want something permanent featured in your studio, how are you going to do that? How you are going to produce water? And then we went to the science lab, that's how the water evaporates. And then we started looking at different things. And they came up with the idea that, okay, we want to make a fountain. We want to have a fountain water feature. I said, how are you going to do that? You need to plan. They said, what's the plan? Well, I said, let's go and find out. So how are you going to do the plan drawing? So these were the skills and strategies that we adapted, that
This
look
is a
for
tough
different
woman.
things.
She's not going to give those kids a break, is she? Good questioning. Good questions always lead to more questions. If you know the answer, you probably didn't need to ask the question. But if you really start pounding on those questions, it always leads to more questioning at a higher level. So
I
that's
never taught them how to do the plan drawing. I asked them that, okay, imagine yourself as a bird and put some things on the floor and look at the shapes from the top. And that will give you some idea of the shapes. And then they actually, I will show you their plan drawings. They're amazing.
Kids can do amazing things. When you give them a problem and say, solve it, if you give them the freedom to solve it, they can do wonderful things. That was a wonderful example.
And then they learned about water cycle. They learned about water evaporation. They learned about technique, electricity, how the water cycle works within the fountain. And we researched about different water features. We went to find out sites on the internet and how the water ponds are built underground. We did landscaping. We were actually gardening and how the pipes are going to go. And we have made recently a great video on this project.
Well, look at what else she's done too. She's built little leaders out of those students. And if you let children think creatively, they will become your leaders. And this is what we want to empower our kids to think. That was great, thanks. How about this table? Any ideas?
I was saying to that, usually we start off with questions. That okay, instead of doing that, we give them the topic and we ask them to come up with questions because they know the norm and the procedure of the classroom, how the lesson is going to go on. So we give them the freedom, okay, and then we have a guided focus.
Right.
Yes, so that
guided questioning is a really good way to start a lesson. Sometimes kids need a little direction.
Yes.
And a guided question, something that's getting them going in the right direction, but will start them pumping on this, is really a good way to go. So guided questioning is a good way to start. And really, when you ask a question like this, how can you make it better? You're giving them a guide to start with. You're not just saying, there it is, do something.
You can give them situations, you can give them stories to write a different ending, you can change the scenarios, you can ask them for different strategies.
And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that, but you're right on the track there with what you need to be doing. All right, how about Becky here?
Since when I was taking pre-nurseries, I was supposed to tell them a story. So the letter which they were into was A. I was supposed to taught them letter A. So what I did, that I showed them an actual axe, and I told them the way that axe is to be used, and I told them a story in which there were lots of things that were started with A. So children came up with a lot of more understanding, and then I asked them, now you have to name me the things, and you have to tell me a story which is having lots of things with A. So children came up with different ideas, and at the end of stories I never asked children that did they like the story or not. I always asked why. If they like it, why. They have to answer their rationale, that why do they like it, and if they don't like, they have to give their reasoning.
That is one of the best things you can do with kids, is ask them
That's
why.
the reason.
And when they say because is not an answer. Because is not an answer. My kids used to hate me for doing that. They'd say, I like this, and I'd say, okay, what's the magic question? They're like, oh, she's going to make me tell her why again. But you need to know why. That's all part of the process, is why. Every kid should be asking why all the time. That was great. How about this table?
Again, my question in all this is that we assess children, when we put forward something and we ask them to, let's say, write a creative story. We give them a criteria we assign marks to that criteria, and we ask our children to go back to that criteria, refer to it again and again, and then come up with something creative. Can they be creative?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's another form of guided questioning when you give them certain criteria. Now look, we all know when we write, children need to write in complete sentences. They need to use punctuation. They need a topic sentence. They need a closing sentence. There's certain things that we have to help build skill-wise for them. I'm not saying they should just go out there and blah, 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 blah. That's not what creativity is all about. That can be a part of creativity. But sometimes we have to guide them in the direction of where they need to go. So that's a great example, giving a criteria list and rubrics. I know, in the university where I work, it's an art school, and they don't use a lot of rubrics. Our department does. And I've had all kinds of professors coming to me and saying, what is a rubric and why do I have to use it? Your students are always saying, what's the rubric? Because it's a guided form of learning. Now, for some things, you don't need a rubric. For others, you do. But that's one way to start getting them jump-started on how to think about things, is using rubrics. How about this group?
I suggest asking children to suggest another way of doing something which they observe in their daily routine. For example, the traffic situation, or we have a traffic jam outside school every day. So come up with a plan and suggest, what ways can be used to make it better.
Well, and you have to give children those opportunities. When I was a school principal, I had a student advisory council. And my little students would come in, my little fourth graders, and they would come in with all of these ideas. And they came marching in one day. It was 4 little boys. And one of them was on the student advisory council, and he brought his buddies with him. And he said, we have a problem. And I said, oh, we do? And they said, yes. And I said, well, what's the problem? And they said, we don't have a basketball goal. And I said, well, no, we don't. And I said, I see we have the problem. What's your solution? And I said, because, if you have a problem, you need to come to me with the solution. And they said, we'll get back to you. So 2 days later, they came marching in again. This time they had 4 more little boys with them. And they said, well, we know the problem now, and we think we've got part of the solution. And I said, okay, you got part of the solution. I said, I'm going to give you 2 more days. Come back with the solution. And then come and see me. I said, I might can make something work for you. So a few days later they came in, and the whole class, about 14 boys, came up. They had enough for the basketball team at this point. And they said, we know the problem, we know the solution, and we think we've got money for it. And I said, money, the magic word? And I said, okay, what are you going to do? And they said, well, we've got where we should have the basketball goal, because we know on the playground we can't have it in the middle of the playground. So we think we found a good spot. They'd even drawn out plans on the school playground where they would have it. And I said, well, where are we going to get it? And they said, oh, we figured that out too. So-and-so's dad owns a sporting goods store, and he says he'll donate it. I said, okay. Now what do you do with the rest of it? And they said, oh, we got that figured out too. We talked to the PTA. So-and-so's mom is on our parent-teacher association. She said she'd give us the money for 4 basketballs. And I said, well, what about a court? And they said, we got that figured out. We talked to the PE teacher, and he said he'd draw it off for us if we would do all the work. And I said, good job. Basketball court solved. We'll have one. Now, they had the problem. I didn't do anything. I just said yes. That's all I said. You can have it. But they went through the problem just like your kids did with that. Sometimes that's what you have to do, is say, go out and think